Not too long ago, we were talking about millennials, and especially how millennials are different in their attitudes and behaviors compared to prior generations. Gen Xers, baby boomers, and while millennials continue to be a significant age cohort, at the end of the day in the US, they are the largest generation in the workforce, and the same is true in emerging markets. They make the majority of workforce in many countries. We are seeing a new generation in town, and that is the Gen Z generation. They are also known as the I generation, the social media generation, because they were born with social media, which makes them a very, very interesting generation. And I'm curious to see how Gen Z is, how is it different? What can we learn about them that makes us understand this new age cohort much better, and ultimately be able to target them and develop products for them? So to help us understand that, it is my pleasure to introduce the panel for today. Graham Hutton, Senior Vice President from IPG Media Brands Insights. Michelle Madansky, who we've met already, Principal at Michelle Madansky Consulting, and Radha Subramanyam, President Insights Research and Data Analytics at iHeartMedia. Welcome, and thank you for offering to walk us through insights around Gen Z. So, Radha, I think you are starting, so you'll give us insights into Gen Z first.
If not, I shall move right back. You can vaguely see me and sort of hear me, right? Thank you for sticking with us, and good to see so many friends, old and new, in this crowd. So I'm going to set this up at a high level. As you were saying a moment ago, we've really been focused on millennials. Honestly, every other RFP we get probably has the word millennial in it. And if it doesn't have the word millennial in it, it probably has the word millennial mom in it. So when I put those two words together, what you do know is that millennials are quite mainstream, right? They're mainstream consumers. They are the bulk of people making purchase decisions. They're different than other generations, but not quite as different as we all thought they were, because honestly, when you grow up, you kind of normalize and become a slightly different person. But we're getting very, very interested in the generation that comes after them. We're still playing around with the names for them. Gen Z is the term du jour, but let's see how it holds up. And what I will say is the insights we have on them so far are highly preliminary, as you can imagine. It takes a long time to be formed into a cohort, and we'll see if they're a cohesive cohort or not. But I thought at this stage we should at least share, at the very least, what we know about them. And if I peek over here, it's because I don't want that thing to go off and, do the whole 7-minute thing, so I'll try my best. All right, so who are these people, right? I've literally been changing the definition even as we go along, and I would say they're people who are roughly 0 to 19-year-old in the US for today. I also want to say that we haven't really started to study Gen Z globally, but given how global culture is and how social media has no boundaries, and how media has no boundaries, and how culture has no boundaries, and how people have no boundaries, I wouldn't be surprised to see some commonalities as we go across countries, but then again, I don't claim to know, about every part of the world. And there are some children of generations before, but heavily children of what we call Gen X in the United States. Gen Z in America, very, very interesting demographically, culturally, and honestly, very different. We use the word majority minority a lot, right? We've used them in the context of states like Texas and California. It's a terrible word. What the heck does majority minority mean, right? Basically, you're saying more people than not are not white. And certainly in the US, this generation is the first sort of non-white or post-white generation in the United States. So 55% non-Caucasian, very heavily multiracial. You ask my children, for example, to put themselves in a racial box, and they can't because they are multiple races. And there's really not the exception, right? 2 times more likely versus the total US population to call themselves multiracial. At this point, because at least in America, we finally are in a post-marriage equality universe, at least for now, where gay marriage is legal and is the law of the land. There's less tolerance for labels around sexual orientation. And finally, this perhaps is the most telling data point for me. 1 in 3 American children are growing up in single-parent households. This is up about 300% from the 1980s. So you can imagine traditional definitions of family are quite disconcerting. You really have to talk about family differently. So, in advertising for the longest time, you could represent people in a certain way. Well, you certainly can't do that anymore. What we saw on TV for a long time is not what people are experiencing or living. Here are some of the cultural traits that we are starting to see. Open-minded, individualistic, at ease with varied views, willing to consider new options. A lot of the school systems have reoriented to be this kind of collaborative, open thinking, sharing, etc. And as you can imagine, social media can both narrow your focus and really broaden it. So it's a very interesting evolution we're dealing with there. We're also seeing a lot of language around loyalty. We will see if this translates over time into loyalty to businesses and brands and so on. I think it's too early to tell, but we're hearing a lot around loyalty and tribes and that as a core value. Fiscally conservative. This is interesting, right? Because these are the children who have grown up in the post-last couple Great Recessions in America. They went through the crisis of 2008, the collapse of the American stock market, Lehman Brothers, and all of that. And having grown up in that, you're seeing people be more careful about money and thinking more about money, even at a really young age. Like sometimes I'll tell my kids to pay for something and they'll be like, no, maybe that's not worth it then. If it's your money, it's different. If it's my money, I might hold on to it, and so on. I think calling them tech natives is beyond an understatement. I mean, these are literally children who could swipe before they could walk. Millennials were sort of born into digital, but these guys have literally not known a world without it. Most of them have grown up with iPads and iPhones in their hands. So again, a fundamentally different relationship towards technology. And because of different familial structure, different racial structure, different cultural structures, ultimately nonconformist labels are difficult. And putting people in strict boxes is uncomfortable. I have to talk momentarily about how when many traditional media have fallen apart, certainly listening and radio hasn't, at least in the United States, holding up hugely in terms of ratings and reach versus all other media out there. But finally, if I could end on how we're thinking about them a lot, right? Obviously technology is important, but they, more than any other generation, think of specific technology brands as ephemeral. Facebook reach in this generation is down to about 40% compared to 80-90% for generations before them. So you can imagine what that means. But they will very self-consciously talk about Musical.ly or Snapchat or something else as ephemeral and are already ready always for the next big thing. Family is the one thing that's not ephemeral. The family bonds that we started to see with millennials is even stronger among Gen Z. So speaking to people across generations is certainly very potent in the American context. And ultimately, I think we can all admit demographics are over. Hyper-targeting doesn't get you everything you need to get. So one-on-one is awesome, but not always applicable. And Gen Z really thinks of themselves as interest tribes, as communities. As we start to segment and as we start to apply all that we've heard over the past day to our specific marketing efforts, thinking more about states of mind, thinking more about tribes could really help us move forward. Thank you. And to be more specific, let me turn it over to Michelle and Graham.
Thank you, Radha.